Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown because, in TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever. Hi there, and welcome to episode 77 of TheKillFile. I am so glad that you guys are back for another story. Before we jump into today's case, a few quick reminders. First off, please take a minute to rate, review, subscribe, follow, whichever your app requests of you for the newest episodes every Monday. It is the best way to support the podcast if you are wanting to help out, and it only takes a second. The next best way to support the podcast would be to head over to Patreon and subscribe to our new monthly Hidden Files, which is the bonus content from yours truly. It's easy to sign up, it's only $5 a month, and you will get 2 bonus episodes from me about subjects that revolve around true crime but aren't the exact same as our Monday episodes. These are things like assassinations, gangsters, and even plane crashes. If you're interested in checking one out first and seeing if you like it, you can do so by buying just one episode as well. But even in this economy, $5 isn't bad. It's really just so that eventually I can have enough people sign up and get a little help with the podcast, maybe with some editing or social media presence or whichever. That way I can make more content for you guys. Remember that I do everything on my own, and now with the new bonus content, the work is almost doubled, but it's more like 1.5 episodes a week, which is still a lot when you do everything else that I do. Anyways, if you're interested in checking out the Hidden Files, you can see that stuff on our website, TheKillFile.com, or head straight to Patreon.com/KillFile to sign up. It's easy. While you're there on the website, feel free to check out the merch site, where we always have great true crime gear, and sport your favorite true crime podcast merch with the rest of us. I can tell you right now that the sweatshirts and hoodies are fantastic. Okay, that's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. So today is a case that is probably a little more well-known, but I can tell you that the first time I heard it, it freaked my shit. This is one of those few cases that have ever stuck with me like this in such a way. Today we're going to be talking about a man named Blake Leibel and the murder of a woman named Iana Kasian. Trigger warnings for today are going to be domestic abuse, murder, brutality, and dismemberment. Let's get to it. Today's story is a newer case that happened just 9 years back in 2016. In the city of LA during this time, there was said to be not only political unrest over Trump being elected, and these of course would include thousands of people protesting in the downtown LA area, but some of the protests that year would include anti-ICE protests, anti-Trump protests, LGBTQIA+ rights, marches, and protests. I mean, you name it, they were out there. Along with the city's outcries were also a rise in hate crimes, unfortunately, in the city as well. According to an AI overview of this time period, it is now known that the violence was unfairly skewed towards the Black community, and they would become the most targeted group at the time. Besides the turmoil in the city following Trump's election, there was also said to be sightings of creepy-ass clowns hanging around in different public spaces that would become a quote-unquote viral phenomenon across the United States. Some sightings of the clowns were just copycat hoaxes, with asshats just wanting to scare people. Some were fake reports also made up to scare people, and one, in particular, would end up being a stunt for a short film of horror. But unfortunately, the panic had started after this one was found out to be fake. Thanks to social media and panic, the clown craziness spread like wildfire, and people who suck jumped on the bandwagon to terrorize others for no fucking reason other than they are complete assholes. Back in May of this year, specifically on May 26, 2016, a crime scene would be found in an apartment that would later lead LA County Sheriff's Department Sergeant William Cotter to say that in his nearly 30 years on the job that he had never, quote, been involved in a more heinous crime than this, end quote. Let's journey back to learn a little bit about the man that would be responsible for one of the most gruesome crime scenes in LA's history. Blake Leibel was born on May 8th in 1981 to parents Eleanor Chattel Leibel and father Lorne Leibel. Now, Lorne Leibel was actually famous in his own right. Turns out that Blake's father was actually a Canadian Olympic sailor who placed 7th at a 2-person keelboat, whatever that is. After this, he would take a ride on a friend's offshore powerboat, and from that moment forward, he was hooked. He then would go out and buy his own performance boat for offshore racing. He won the American Powerboat Association Rookie of the Year award and was deemed Canadian's Yachtsman of the same year. He then won a U.S. national championship and would go on to earn Superboat World Champion. After Lorne would win his second World Superboat Championship, he retired from the boat world and is now said to be involved in racing vintage cars, as well as collecting them. In 2006, he was actually inducted into the Canadian Motorsport Hall of Fame. So as you can see, Lorne was kind of a big deal in the boating world, and whatever he wanted to do in life, it seems like he went hard for it and wasn't afraid to do some hard work. He also did other things like run his own company and was said to be a millionaire by the young age of 30. Unfortunately, he would also gain the reputation of being the first Canadian to fail an Olympic drug test. Turns out that they found traces of a banned stimulant. Now, Blake's mother, a woman named Eleanor Leibel, was no slouch herself. She was actually the heiress of a plastics company called Aros Products. It seems her father Paul, so Blake's grandfather, actually founded a plastic sheeting company back in 1957 that would become a multi-million-dollar company, and today it is known as Polytrap Products Limited. So when the two parents got together, it didn't seem that either party was in it for the money because they each had their own. Blake's parents were said to have separated when Blake and his older brother Cody were young, but the parents never did divorce legally. Blake went to live with his mother, Eleanor, and Cody would actually go live with their father. Blake would grow up with his mother and basically being estranged from their father. Another source would say that Blake spent a lot of his life trying to impress his father and basically prove to him that it was not a mistake to have him, but that he was never really able to do this, which is actually kind of sad. However, Blake was able to live a good life with the wealth that his parents both had. After the boys were grown and were able to venture out on their own, both of the boys would end up in Los Angeles. Blake would move there after older brother Cody and brought along some of his buddies from other famous or wealthy families. It was estimated that when Blake moved out on his own, he was actually getting an allowance from his mother of around $18,000 a month, which, wow, that must be nice. By the time Blake and his friends got to the LA scene, it was noted that brother Cody had already rubbed elbows with some famous names at a pretty big underground poker table called Molly's Game. And according to Law and Crime Network, this is the place that hosted big names like Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, and even Leonardo DiCaprio. Can you imagine sitting down and playing poker with any of them? That would be so much fun, and I would love to try to beat their bigwig asses at some Texas Hold'em. What a brag that would be. No one would really believe you, though, unless you had pictures. And even if with AI, who knows? But anyways, during my research, I saw that there's a movie out about this famous underground poker game that's based on a book by Molly Bloom herself, and it's called Molly's Game. If you've seen it, tell me how it is. I guess circling these games would come some arrests of like 24 people who had attended the games for things like racketeering, extortion, money laundering, etc. One source would even say that Molly Bloom was arrested, I guess. Maybe it's in the movie. Sources say that Cody was building his reputation of being somewhat of a quote-unquote playboy in the area. He also followed in his father's footsteps in dipping his toe into the real estate market out there in LA. He would also become the youngest person at just 23 years old, and this is apparently in the entire world, to have owned a Ferrari Enzo that is estimated to cost around $1.2 million. I guess those are pretty rare, and there's only a few hundred that were made. I'm not a car person, so I have no idea, but I'm sure it was pretty. So Blake would go on to do some things of note himself, but in different areas. It seemed that unlike his brother, Blake was more into the directing and writing scene, and as a kid, he was the one who was into video games and comic books. He would begin by pitching some ideas to people about science fiction, murder, and some psychology. Blake seemed to like more of the dark side of things. A friend would say that he really liked the Faces of Death movies, which I've also never seen but heard a lot about. His friends would say that he had, quote, really big, cool ideas, but could never really execute, end quote. Another friend would say that while there were a ton of people who thought Blake was a genius, there were others who thought that he would come off as a salesman and a con artist. He would go on to work or create a few things of note, though. First, he would end up directing, according to Hollywood Reporter article, quote, a silly indie high school comedy called Bald, end quote. After this, he actually ended up working for Mel Brooks, which is crazy. I guess that he was a creative consultant and storyboard supervisor on Spaceballs, the animated series. I have never seen Spaceballs, okay? I didn't watch it growing up, so when I try to go back and watch it, it's hard to watch. I know you guys are going to roast me for this, but what is the big deal with Spaceballs? Maybe it's because I'm a Star Wars fan, or maybe it's like I should have seen it growing up so that I could have the nostalgia, but I just don't get it. He would also go on to create a graphic novel that we will talk about soon. It's always been said that he wrote the novel, but I did see one source, actually a couple sources, that said that he created the concept and everything in it, but he hired somebody else to help write it. Either way, it's his novel, and it would end up being quite a big deal in this story, but we will get there. Blake would, in 2006, end up meeting a woman named Amanda Braun, who, like Blake, would be described as a party girl. Blake had been described by many who had worked with him that he was just always wanting to make people laugh and for everyone to always have a good time. One personal account of someone that he was supposed to be working with often said that they would end up just getting stoned in Blake's kitchen and hanging out. He seemed to be the guy who was always up for a good time, so when he met Amanda, the two clicked, living the same type of lifestyles. Amanda was a former model who was seen around the same networks of people and parties that Cody and Blake were often at. The couple started dating and then eventually would move in together and seemed to stay out of the limelight. They were said to have lived in a mansion in Beverly Hills, and not far from where they lived, just down the street in fact, Blake would become somewhat of a regular at a place called Soho House, which was said to be a private club. People who knew them both would say that Blake seemed a little more reserved than Amanda, as he would often stay home at times, where she would be seen out at parties and socializing more often. However, Amanda is said to be a sweet and kind person. Eventually, the couple would be married in 2011, and at the time of their marriage, Amanda was pregnant with their son. Another thing that would happen in 2011 would not be as joyous as their nuptials. Blake's mother, Eleanor, was unfortunately dying from cancer of the brain. A friend of Blake's would say there was one particular Skype call where Blake and his mother were chatting, and sadly, at the time, Eleanor's hair was falling out from the cancer treatments, and when the two would get off the call, the friend of Blake would say that he just sobbed. This is around the time where friends would recall that Blake was having some unusual behavior, including rage or even throwing tantrums if he was unable to get things his own way. Sources said that although things had not escalated into physical problems, there was said to be a lot of verbal abuse coming from Blake towards others. After he would have these outbursts and anger fits, he would turn around and apologize to the people who he felt he had wronged, and some sources said that this could have been because Blake absolutely hated being alone. It would be in 2011 when Eleanor would succumb to her illness and pass away. Blake, at the time of his mother's death, was said to be so distraught that he didn't think that he would be able to handle his mother's funeral, so he didn't even go. One source said they didn't think that he would have been able to handle it either. After the death of Eleanor, Blake and Cody would both get some inheritance, but oddly enough, it was their father who would end up being the trustee of the will, which royally ticked Blake off. The couple had not been together in a very long time, so why would he be the trustee? It didn't make a lot of sense. In fact, people who knew Blake and Amanda said that it kind of became the consensus that many alleged that Lorne may have been able to change Eleanor's will before she passed to make himself the trustee, but of course that's never been proven. It was expected that a large portion of Eleanor's estate, which was estimated to be around $12 million, would go to Blake, and of course, some had been set aside for Cody as well. This is not exactly how things went, though. Not only was Lorne the trustee, but there was a pretty large chunk of money in her will for him as well. Again, not making a whole lot of sense, especially when you learn that when Eleanor's father passed away, leaving her as the heiress to the plastics company, he didn't leave Cody anything in his will, and he stated that this was not because he didn't love or adore his grandson, but rather because he felt that his father, Lorne, would adequately be able to take care of the boy. AKA, Lorne was also rich, so he didn't really need any money from Eleanor's father's estate. So this begged the question to me, why would Eleanor leave Lorne as the trustee, and not just that, but leave him some money if Cody and Blake had their own inheritances? I have heard some speculation like, well, they were married and maybe they kept a good relationship, or maybe she thought that it was smarter to leave it to Lorne and not in her younger sons, maybe even spoiled kids' hands, just in case, and maybe she knew that Lorne didn't need the money. But then why leave him some? The whole thing is a little weird if you ask me, but I'm not rich, so what the fuck do I know about trustees and inheritances? Regardless of the thinking there, Blake was furious, and he would end up taking his brother and his father to court over their share of Eleanor's estate. Part of her estate included a $5.5 million home in Toronto, but I think that was included in the estate worth of $12 million. This house was given to Blake. While Blake was contesting the estate and trying to get the will overturned, he would say that he didn't have much of an income of his own, which is why he was needing the rest of her estate. In fact, this was true. He didn't really have his own income. He was mostly supporting his family on the allowance from his mother. He had those little projects, of course, but many said that Blake would dump some money into a project, but they would never really go anywhere. I'm guessing he wasn't a great businessman, and God forbid the guy get a job, right? So he takes the brother and dad to court, and unfortunately, he would lose the contesting of the will. Blake's friends would say that this left him feeling betrayed by his own family. After this, Blake's attorney's law firm would sue him for around $400,000 that they said he never paid in attorney's fees. It was around the death of his mother and the loss of the court case when things in Blake's life would start to spiral. Now, before we move on to what comes next, let's step back for a second and talk about this graphic novel that came out about a year before his mother's death. As I mentioned before, there is some controversy on this novel, with people that wrote the novel saying that Blake gave them the idea for the graphic novel, but it was them that came up with a lot of it. However, even if that is true, not only did Blake want credit for the thing, but it was also seen as some sort of foreshadowing or even a blueprint for the grisly crime to come. First off, let's just start with the cover. It's a baby. It's clearly a doll, mind you, but it's missing the top part of the skull, so it has this light brownish brain, which to be honest I thought was hair until I read that it was a scalped baby doll. I have read that it was somebody else's idea for that picture, but it is kind of weird. So after I scripted out a bunch about the graphic novel of whatever I could find, because the copies are expensive, I was just going to tell you what other people have said about it, but I was able to read it in its entirety online. Oh boy. One thing that I will say that I found funny was that not long ago I was talking about how antisocial personality disorder doesn't sound as bad as a psychopath. And in the novel, a investigator says, quote, "Now we call it antisocial personality disorder. Not as frightening," end quote. As the investigator is at a crime scene where a man, I take it a serial killer that had ASPD, was quote-unquote cured because his psychiatrist thought since he was able to teach him empathy that he was cured. Well, of course he wasn't, because in the graphic novel, it showed on one page that the man who was allegedly cured had killed a woman. And not just killed her, but her head was missing. Her body was on the bed, but absolutely no head. And blood was everywhere covering the bed. It was definitely graphic. Basically, this doctor thought that he could cure evil, which he called a syndrome, like the title of the book. It wasn't awful. It wasn't great. I felt like it led up to something awesome, and then it just kind of fell off. I will say that I saw parallels to Blake being a director for sure. You could tell that he wrote some of it. The reason that people get up in arms about the graphic novel is because some of the things in the book are similar to what happened in real life. If I'm being honest, though, it doesn't mirror the crimes, but it could say something about Blake's state of mind, maybe, or his tortured self. But I feel like this was blown way out of proportion for the sake of the media, but what do I know? If you guys want to read it, I will link it where I was able to read it, called zipcomic.com. Just be aware that it's graphic, and it also shows a page of a guy who kills some people, I think it's a family, at what looks to be like a dinner, and he's just sitting there drinking something. It's weird. I read from one source that Lionsgate had come to Blake at one point wanting to turn Syndrome into a TV show, and his friend was heading the negotiations. The Syndrome novel is what he would really be known for. The famous quote from the graphic novel that you will hear in this case a lot, and it is creepy, I will give them that, but it's, quote, "In the end, we all become monsters," end quote. Okay, so after Blake's mother died is really when his descent into madness would begin. Sources say that this is the time where Blake would become distant, somewhat erratic, and even paranoid. Although he did smoke a lot of weed, so that could account for a little of the paranoia. A flurry of bad things would hit Blake seemingly all around the same time. It was said that he was stressed because of his brother Cody. I guess Cody had racked up quite a hefty gambling debt, in where Blake would tell one friend that his brother lost $1 million in just one game alone. He was also having a hard time with his Hollywood lifestyle and trying to support it. And in 2015, records would show that Blake had filed for divorce from his wife, Amanda. I believe at the time Amanda was pregnant with their second child. It was around this time that his friends would say Blake would become obsessed with darkness and violence. He pitched a new idea for another script, but this one was said to be about a guy who wore a cape, who was a vigilante, not unlike Batman, who, by the way, is my favorite superhero. So this Batman-like character would cut the heads off of villains that he would fight, and then he would upload the videos of what he did on YouTube. People who read the script, they hated it, saying that it was like a ripoff of Batman, but if Batman was a violent, sadistic psychopath. It was, I guess, torture porn, and said the creativity was lacking. There wasn't anything good that I could find about the script. It was called Psychopomp. It was only in the span of a few weeks that Blake left Amanda, filed for divorce, and got an apartment on Holloway, and even had a new girlfriend named Iana Kasian. Iana Kasian was born in Estonia, however she was raised in the Ukraine, where she had grown up with her sister and her parents. Iana's father was said to be a worker in the naval yard, and her mother, named Olga, was in the healthcare industry. Iana actually went to law school and eventually graduated, working for years in tax crimes, where she would prosecute them in Ukraine. Sources said she had dreams of becoming an interpreter in the United States, and she would immigrate to the US in 2014. It would not take long after meeting and starting to date Blake that Iana would end up pregnant. One source said that not long after Blake basically had walked out on Amanda and his family, Amanda had seen Blake and Iana driving somewhere together, so she followed with the intention of confronting them. The car ended up at a restaurant, and when Amanda confronted the pair, Iana was alleged to have rubbed her belly and told Amanda she was pregnant. Can you imagine? That's so sad for Amanda, I think. That must have been heartbreaking to her. It was said at the same time that Blake and Iana were dating, he also started to see yet another woman. Who has time for that kind of shit? Also, what a shitbag. Left his pregnant wife, got a new girlfriend, and knocked her up, and now he has found yet another woman behind her back? What a dick. The new woman who Blake was also seeing was a woman named Constance Bucafieri, who Blake, I guess, knew from years back, and her job was a storyboard artist. I read some things about this woman, like she seems to be super talented in her job. I guess she worked on Frozen and the live version of Aladdin, but sources say that she's sort of volatile and has been arrested for things like being drunk and disorderly. And I think at the end it was saying that even Amanda had to get a restraining order from her and another guy named Steven that was involved in this case. She had made threats to kill him, apparently. Blake and Iana seemed to be a happy couple for all intents and purposes. In the latter part of 2015, Blake would buy another house, and in this one, Constance moved in. So he has Amanda at their mansion, who he filed for divorce from. He has Iana at an apartment, who's pregnant with their baby. And now he bought yet another place to stash the mistress of his girlfriend, and he's not even yet divorced. Constance would later state that Blake was obsessed with her for years and even stalked her, although those allegations were unsubstantiated. However, their relationship was short-lived, lasting only about 6 weeks. After this, Constance reached out to Amanda, and the two began a weird friendship where they essentially hated on Iana. They had sent dozens of text messages about how much they disliked her and even joked about calling INS on her. Amanda at one point had said that Iana was not a nice person and that Blake needed some serious help, and that he now basically hated all of his past friends and his family and only saw them if he needed something. In April of 2016, Olga had gotten to LA once Iana was in her last month of pregnancy so that she could help her daughter with the new baby once it was born. She, I guess, was really excited to be there. Iana had been sending updates all the time to her mother as the pregnancy progressed, but she also said her life wasn't really perfect out there. Iana had confessed to her mother that although it was better than in the Ukraine, that Blake smoked a ton of weed and allegedly used mushrooms and synthetic weed as well. Blake had been telling Iana that the couple would go on to be married and had bought her a car and a ring, so although not perfect, Iana was still in it. When Olga got to the United States, Blake paid for her to be put up into an apartment that was not far from their shared apartment. The next month, on May 3rd, 2016, which oddly enough was Olga's birthday, Iana would give birth to the couple's baby girl, who they named Diana. Right after Diana was born is when shit would hit the fan, and this story would go from weird and paranoid to downright chaotic and scary. As previously mentioned, Blake was headed in a dark and violent path where he was starting to become unhinged and acting out. Just a few days after Diana was born, Blake started to exhibit some strange behavior, things like keeping all of the windows and shades shut. However, when Olga would come over, she would open them wide up. He also kept the air conditioner running constantly, and when Iana would complain about the cold, because it was even going into the baby's room, Blake would tell Iana to go stay at her mom's. And then Iana did. She would head over to her mom's apartment for a day or two, and then she would end up back at Blake's house anyways. It was also reported that Blake was seemingly jealous of baby Diana getting all of the attention from Iana. Basically, he was pissy that the baby was her whole world and not him. Look, there's a part of me that makes me hear this and I want to scream at this asshole for being selfish, and it's a baby, so of course it gets all of the attention and to get over himself. This is the bigger part of me. It makes me want to freak out. But there is a tiny part of me that understands the jealousy. I'm not saying it's right, but if you think about the fact that this man didn't have a father around and whose mother was probably very busy as well, maybe he couldn't help the fact that he felt this way. It's actually not uncommon from what I've read in the past, but this is a big but. There's always ways to handle your feelings without shaming the mother of your child for focusing solely on this baby and not you. Sources would say that he would demand sex from Iana and then threaten to leave her if she wouldn't do it. And that just makes me want to stab this fucker in the face. Are you fucking kidding me? This woman who just spent 9, but really like 10 months carrying around and creating this other human being who she just finally got out of her body, meaning no matter how she delivered it, she is sore and tired and beat up a little, and he is demanding sex? Doctors don't even want women to have sex for usually like 6 weeks after they've given birth, whether it's vaginal or C-section. So fuck right off, you prick. I feel so bad for Iana. I would have told that motherfucker to kick rocks. Unfortunately, that is not what happened. It was reported that Iana actually left the baby with her mother for a few days so that she could work on her relationship with Blake. I cannot imagine what this would be like for a new mother. I'm sorry, but the bond of a baby with its mother is just so much different than a father. Not that the fathers don't bond with their babies or love them unconditionally or instant love, but I personally don't feel that it's quite the same as a woman who carried this baby in her body for almost a year. It's like we know the baby before it even breathes its first breath. I should say that this is for most moms, not all moms, because there are definitely some shitty-ass mothers out there who don't bond with their babies at all and who always put themselves first for sure. But leaving your baby with your mother trying to fix your relationship with this man-child must have been heartbreaking, and my personal thought is, if he loved his child and his child's mother, he would have never asked her to do that or even let her do that. Neither of them deserved that. Anyways, in the same month, May of 2016, Blake would be arrested for sexual assault alleged by Constance Bucafuri, I don't know if I'm saying that right, the third girlfriend. Blake was released on bail just 15 hours after he was arrested. In the court documents of the rape allegation, it was said that the assault occurred a few months before she brought the charges against him, but Constance claimed that he actually assaulted her multiple times on different occasions and then even infected her with some type of STD, to which she had to get treatment. These charges were said to be on the heels of a time when Blake allegedly had tried getting help with the eviction of Constance from his home that he had bought that she was living in. It was actually Iana that bailed Blake out. However, one source said that Iana had to call and ask Amanda for the money to bail him out. But once Iana knew about Constance, she was done with this relationship and she moved into the apartment with her mother, Olga. While Iana and her mother, Olga, had been out shopping for the baby, and this was just about 4 days after she had moved in with her mother, Blake was blowing up Iana's phone. Sadly, Blake was able to convince Iana to come over and talk to him, so she left baby Diana in the care of her mother and headed to Blake's house. Now, her mom, Olga, said to have tried to get her daughter to kind of stay away from Blake for now and stay with her and the baby, but Iana may have sensed something was wrong with the father of her child, so that might be why she went to go meet him. On May 24th, Olga and Iana had a phone conversation, but it would be the next day, so May 25th, that she wasn't hearing back from Iana after calling multiple times. Olga and a friend would head over to Blake's around 1:30 that afternoon, which there's security camera footage of, both of them standing behind like a locked gate to the apartment entrance. Iana's car was said to be in the parking garage, so they knew that she was there, and they started getting a little bit worried that she wasn't answering. Olga would say in an interview with All That's Interesting, quote, "I did try to call her, and the calls went to the voice message. All of a sudden, I had this feeling that I had to get there." End quote. Call it mother's intuition. Sources would say that Olga tried to call the police first to do maybe like a wellness check or something, but nothing came from this. So this was when she would actually head over. Olga could see that the balcony sliding glass door was slightly open, and this is when she started yelling up to Blake to let her in the gate. Blake never came out. In fact, Olga would later recant the only thing she saw was the silhouette of who she assumed was Blake sliding the glass door shut silently. This is when Olga really started to panic and she called the police. 2 officers would come out who can also be seen on the security footage. All of the blinds were drawn and the doors were shut to the apartment, but because there was no signs of foul play and the officers couldn't reach him on a cell phone, they couldn't go in or do anything more, so they were forced to leave. May 26th, the next day, Olga was still calling Iana and leaving lots of messages, begging her daughter to call her back. Later on the morning of the 26th, she again called the police trying to get help, but this time she would state that because her daughter had just given birth to the baby and it was a C-section, which is considered to be a major surgery, she was now becoming afraid for her daughter's medical health and that something could be wrong. When the authorities arrived, they were able to question a neighbor of Blake's, and the neighbor said that they hadn't seen anyone for a few days. The cops again called Blake and left a voicemail, but no one, of course, called back. Sources would say that somehow they were able to get a key to Blake's house, and when they unlocked the door and tried to enter, the safety lock was engaged, which alerted the authorities that someone was actually inside the apartment. They had to be for that to be used. The authorities then came to the conclusion that there were extenuating circumstances and that it would be reasonable for them to go ahead and enter the apartment to check if everyone was all right. So they broke down the door, and what they would find would be something from nightmares. The apartment was in total darkness, but reports said the living room was an absolute mess. However, the authorities were able to clear the balcony, living room, and kitchen with no signs of either Blake or Iana. They got to where there was only one room left in the house to check, and as the authorities tried to enter, they would find out the door was locked. They tried to get into the bedroom, but they would find it barricaded with a mattress. From the other side, they had been yelling for whoever was in there to come out. And this is when they finally heard Blake's voice saying that Iana wasn't there and that he was not going to come out. One source actually said that he eventually said he didn't want to come out because he was afraid the cops would beat him up. What a pansy ass. The officers did their best to tell him they weren't going to hurt him. They were actually just there to check on Iana and make sure that she was all right. Blake said that she was at the hospital and even went as far as giving the authorities a room number that she was in. He then told the cops that his quote-unquote father would be there soon, and until the man arrived, he was not coming out of the room. However, it wasn't Blake's father that he was talking about. It was actually his accountant and his alleged mentor, Stephen Green, that he was actually referring to. Blake had asked Stephen to come to the apartment, and Stephen had wanted to help Blake because I guess for like a month before this, Stephen had been trying to get a hold of Blake, saying that he was there for him and wanted to help him with whatever he was going through. And although he had called and texted and even emailed, he never heard back from Blake until the day of this call where he was asked to come over. You can see in the video footage that Stephen was like on the phone and he was like hurrying into the apartment. A detective would then be called to the unfolding scene, and when he arrived, Stephen was on the phone with Blake, who was still holed up in the bedroom, and Stephen was sitting in the living room. Stephen eventually was able to talk Blake into coming out, but at the time, Blake was only wearing boxers, so he needed some clothes to put on, which was weird to me because he was in his bedroom. Like, duh. So probably realizing that this was weird, the officers would check the clothes that Stephen was going to hand to Blake, and of course, inside, they found his passport and $4,000 cash. The thought to the police was that maybe Blake was going to make a run for it. I don't know, maybe there was like a window in the bedroom, who knows, but he never got the chance to run. Once the officers were able to get into the bedroom, one source would say that one of them actually screamed at the sight. Brace yourselves, because this is going to be graphic. Authorities inside the room would find the deceased body of Iana Kasian in a gory fashion. She was said to be lying on the bed with a Mickey Mouse blanket covering most of her body up to her head, but there was blood everywhere. The authorities also saw smears of blood on the walls and furniture was moved, like possibly Blake was trying to cover up some evidence. Sergeant Rob Martindale would say that the only way that he could really describe the crime scene and the abuse to her body would be to quote-unquote say it was sadistic. It was immediately clear that Iana was indeed deceased and had gone through some significant trauma before her death. So I'm going to bounce back and forth between the autopsy results and the crime scene just to give you a full picture of what this poor woman went through before her death. First off, the autopsy would show that Iana had suffered through 8 hours of torture before she would finally pass away from the horror that was inflicted upon her body. There was evidence of abuse and beating to the left side of her face that indicated there was some sort of blunt force trauma. The autopsy showed that she actually had bite marks on her bicep and on the left side of her jaw. They also found fingernail scrapes under her jaw as well. Iana had also been scalped during the torture. Blake removed her entire scalp from the eyebrow bone area all the way to the back of her hairline. Sources said that Blake used a knife and a razor blade in the hours-long attack and torture to Iana. It was also stated that Iana was said to be alive for most of her mutilation and for most of the attack. A large portion of Iana's right side of the face had also been quote-unquote torn away and was missing. You could actually see parts of her skull bone. That's how much tissue and flesh had been cut away. Iana also suffered numerous cuts to her face near her eyebrows and a large gash that went from her cheek all the way to her jaw. Iana's left ear had been cut off, and there was also another large gash from her cheek to where her ear had once been. The autopsy showed that the skin on her face was both cut off and torn off by the killer's own hand. The ME was able to find that the reason the police say that Iana was extremely pale when they found her deceased was because there was an absence of blood in Iana's arteries, veins, and even her heart, suggesting that she had been drained of a lot of her blood. Now, medically speaking, sources would say that the amount of blood that was missing from her body would not be purely from gravity. It wouldn't have dumped so much, but rather her heart had to be pumping as the blood was spilling out. The ME concluded that the killer must have drained the blood from Iana, most likely in the bathtub, by placing Iana's feet above her head, and even went as far as saying that he could have ran water over her head, which made it pump even faster and prevented the blood from clotting. I'm assuming that this would be after the significant portions of her head and face had been missing, which is absolutely horrific. The ME would also conclude that Iana's cause of death was exsanguination, which means that she died from the blood being drained out of her body. The ME was also able to tell by some foam that was found inside of Iana's nose during her autopsy that her head must have been submerged in water for at least a half an hour, and then I guess her body was washed and cleaned up and placed back on the bed with clean sheets, which is what they had found when the authorities had arrived at the scene. This part was perplexing to them because the actual spot where she was lying was so clean of blood. There was some blood around the room for sure, but not enough for the significant wounds that she had and to account for why she was so pale. It was later thought that the bathroom could be involved, but they only saw some blood and hair, but not everything. So, the crime scene investigators would use luminol, which of course makes blood glow under black light or UV light. And when they did this to Blake's bathroom, the fucking thing lit up like a damn Christmas tree. The pictures of the luminol test to the bathroom and to the bedroom floor were insane. I'll try to post them this week for you guys to see. At the crime scene, they would also find a pillow that was next to Iana, and it had indentation marks as if Blake had been lying there next to her. At the crime scene, they would find blood on the floor, walls, and mattress. They also found pieces of human flesh about the room, for example, behind the mattress. One thing that always stuck out to me in this case is that they found part of Iana's eyebrow on the floor, not far from the bed. Can you imagine seeing that at a crime scene? Holy shit. There was blood spatter found on a second mattress or bed that was also in the room, and this is the one that Blake had used to block the door. They would also find a razor in the trash that had been covered in blood and had clumps of hair stuck in it as well. They also found round or oval marks on the headboard, which would be consistent with the marks made after Iana's scalp had been removed. So somehow her head was hit against the headboard numerous times. There's pictures online of this as well. With the luminol, the investigators would find blood that had been cleaned up in the hallway, kitchen, and dining room, both bedrooms in the apartment, and even the guest bathroom. So you have to wonder, was this from Blake, or did Iana make it out of the room somehow? I also couldn't help but wonder if he was in the process of cleaning everything and her body in order to run away and say that it wasn't even him that did it. Maybe that someone broke in or something, and that's why he was trying to get everything cleaned up. But dumb, Who would break in and kill someone in an obviously rage-fueled, torturous way, and then stay to clean it up unless you live there? Duh. The investigators would find blood in the garbage disposal as well inside the kitchen. While the crime scene was being investigated, it was realized that the garbage chute to the building was very close to Blake and Iana's apartment, and when they looked in the dumpster, it led to what they would find: bags that contained bedding, clothing, towels, the bed skirt, placemats, all sorts of household items covered in blood and human flesh. One source would even say that some of the tissue had hair, leading them to believe that it was scalp tissue, and they would even find Iana's missing ear. On the crime scene photos, you can see numerous handprints in blood all over these different items. These handprints would eventually be matched to Blake because the print was unique in that Blake was missing a part of his pinky. So the handprints were a perfect match. They also found Iana's DNA and blood under his fingernails when they tested him. It was known that Iana did put up one hell of a fight. She had self-defense wounds on her, and Blake had scratches and bruises and a fucking black eye in his crazy-ass mugshot that I used for the main picture of this episode. Yeah, that creepy weird smile shit that he's doing is just after he was arrested, and they were finding the pieces of Iana in his apartment. What a fucking freak! Like, how angry do you have to be to do that to someone, especially the mother of your child? Authorities would figure out that at some point during the attack or cleaning stage or whatever, Blake used Iana's cell phone to order some fucking food on Postmates 2 different times. Yeah. When Blake was being talked to in the apartment, he tried to pretend like he didn't know that Iana was dead. And when they told him, like, yeah, dude, she's dead, he said to them that he guessed they would have to figure out who did it then. What? Dude, you were in the room with her tortured and bloody body, and your move is to pretend like you didn't know that she was dead or that it wasn't you. When Blake was tested for drugs to see if this was a drug-fueled murder, they only found weed in his system, and I can tell you, that didn't cause him to do this. A few days after his arrest, Blake was wearing what one source says was a white padded suicide jacket during court, where he pled not guilty. I couldn't help but wonder if this was for show, or if it was real. Like, did his attorney say, "Get yourself put into one of those so the judge thinks you're crazy"? Well, he was found sane and fit to stand trial. During the trial, the prosecution could only guess as to why Blake would do such heinous things against Iana right after their daughter was born. They would say not only the jealousy of the baby, but also possibly power and anger, saying that Blake actually threw pieces of Iana away like garbage. Poor Olga had to sit there and endure hearing about everything that had happened to her daughter in the apartment, and sources would say that she would often turn her head at the parts that were hard to hear and sobbed. I honestly cannot fucking imagine that pain. Just trying to put myself there, but with my own child, it's impossible. I start to choke up and my brain is like, fuck no, and stops it. Seriously. That is a strength and fortitude one could only hope to ever achieve. Olga would later make comments feeling so guilty that her daughter was being killed, and she didn't feel like she had done anything to stop it. But in reality, she did try. No one would help her. She went to the police and they didn't help. What else could she do? When later interviewed, she was asked why she forced herself to sit through all of the trial. Olga would say to CBS News, through a translator, quote, "I am her mom, and I must put all of her pain through me," end quote. I weirdly understand exactly what she means, and I would do the exact same thing. I guess you never know until it's you. I wondered if she had a translator there for the trial. Like, did she understand everything that they were saying or not? I was just curious. Either way, she still had to endure the pictures of her daughter and the crime scene and seeing her daughter deceased, but I was just curious. Blake had only a defense that tried to say that there was a third unknown person because they found DNA from an unknown male on the outside of 3 of the 11 trash bags from Blake's apartment, which is so stupid because they were in a dumpster, so duh. Of course, this did nothing to deter the jury. It only took them 3 hours to convict Blake, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. This could have been a death penalty case, but it was not pursued, and I'm not exactly sure why. Afterwards, during a civil suit, Blake was ordered to pay $41.6 million to Iana's family, and I also saw that Olga may have gone after Amanda Braun, his ex-wife, as well, because I guess she was served with some papers at the trial that she allegedly, knocked to the floor and left. Iana was buried in Ukraine, and Olga is now raising baby Diana in the Ukraine, who is absolutely adorable. And that, my friends, is the story of Blake Leibel and the horrific, gruesome murder of Iana Kasian. All I can think is that poor baby, Diana, has lost her mother in the most absolutely horrific way. And who did it? Her own damn father. The heartbreak. I have seen in articles that Diana looks just like Blake. I don't know if she does or not, but she is a super cute little girl. I wonder if Olga and the rest of the family will tell her one day what happened to her mother, or if they will try to keep it away from her. I would not know what to do. Like, part of me would want to change her last name from Kasian, just so that she couldn't find the horrible story. And part of me would want to almost like normalize it, not by giving the details or anything, but kind of like letting this little girl know as she's growing up, like her mother's gone, but she loved her so much. Oof, that's fucking rough. Poor Olga and Diana. I wish them nothing but peace and happiness, and I hope that they're both able to find some resemblance of that. Also, what a horrific scene, right? This is why this story stuck with me. I don't know why, but I can totally picture this creepy freak all barricaded in his room with blood everywhere and poor Iana butchered and mutilated. What the fuck? Like, what caused him to do that? It wasn't just a snap decision and oops, she's dead. This is like a prolonged torture, and she had to be screaming. How did no one hear anything? This is why people often point to his graphic novel, saying that he was obsessed with gruesome art or whatever. But I don't think he did the details in the novel or the art. He just came up with the concept. And personally, I don't believe in this particular case that one fits with the other. I know that there are some people who are obsessed with things and those end up coming out later, but I'm just not sure if that is the case here or not. I just can't believe the stuff that he did to Iana. Just unbelievable. And was still fit to stand trial, meaning he knew exactly what he was doing. Fuck. Well, I hope you guys found this horrible murder as interesting as I did, and if we can learn anything from this, I would hope that we know sometimes it's okay to let things cool down for a while. If you are nervous, or if you're meeting with somebody that seems to be a little unhinged, make sure you do it in public. I don't know. Come on back next Monday when we will cover another case here on The Kill File where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. A few quick reminders before you go. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your platform. It will help the podcast grow and other true crime lovers to find us. Also, check out the website, TheKillFile.com, where you can suggest a case, find our merch shop, and submit a listener file. Follow The Kill File on your favorite social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok. Of course, you can always subscribe on YouTube as well. Find all of the links for the socials on the website. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case on The Kill File where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.